Welcome to the Troubled Artists Podcast, Episode 38, Daniel J. Pico.
Welcome back to the Troubled Artists Podcast. Today I am here with Daniel J. Pico. Daniel J. Pico is a filmmaker and storyteller whose passion began at age 8 and later earned a BA in directing and screenwriting from Columbia College, Chicago. He has directed 3 theatrically released feature films, Common Sense, the award-winning Farewell Darkness, and The Withering, along with more than 85 short films, music videos, commercials, and documentaries, while also working extensively as an editor and producer. So Daniel, thank you so much for being on the show. So before we begin, I do like to ask this one question. Tell us in your own words, who is Daniel J. Pico?
That's it. It is a good question. I think even after 45 years on this planet, I'm still trying to figure that out. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, it's I know it's a really deep question, but it's just that
I suppose I don't really know. Having a sense of oneself as an artist versus just like as a human being. Like as an artist, I try to just be honest. You know, I just want to present truth in all of the stories I tell. Sometimes it's heightened to truth, but I try to be true and honest, as an artist, and then as a person. I guess all of us, I'm just trying to get by one day at a time, trying to figure out what the right path is, and weigh my decisions, try to be kind. I think kindness is such an important part of, like, I guess, what I look for from others, as I get to know people and as I let them into my life. I look for kindness in them, and then, try to return that. I'm not always successful, but, I try to live that example of what I expect from others, and then try to give that back into the world.
that's nice. And yeah, I think overall, yeah, just being kind and being a good listener is really great, like not just for artists, but just everyone in general. I feel like those are really good qualities to have. I am curious to know, just like, how did you get into film and filmmaking in the first place? Was it something you discovered early in life or later on in life? Just kind of tell us about that.
I don't think there was ever anything I ever really wanted to do, other than make movies in some capacity. I mean, from the time I was a little kid, I loved movies. We had a household where there was, my father was one of the first people that had 2 VCRs back in the 80s, at least, of the friends I knew. Like, I'm certain there were many other people that had that. But because of that, he would tape movies that he would rent, and then we would have a library of movies all the time in our house. So I always had access to classic films, or films at least that my father really liked. And he liked, mature pictures, like he loved The Godfather, and, All the President's Men, and, Eating Raoul, and like all these crazy movies that were, in his collection. And then, when movies started becoming more popular sell-through, he would start buying those, and then he got a Laserdisc player, and, and it was, we always had a library in our house of films. And then I also, as I became a teenager, I started investigating more movies, going to the actual library. But I think the actual act of filmmaking and creating my own movies started when I was about 8 years old, with my brother. And he got, I guess I'd say he got the camera, but it became both of ours. But it was a Fisher-Price PXL 2000 Fisher-Price camcorder. And it was basically recorded image and sound to high bias audio cassette tapes. And you could make little movies, it was a toy / camera. It only had 2 settings, indoor and outdoor. And you had to put like a little filter on for the outdoor, and, take it off if you went indoors, and, God help you if you forgot to do one or the other, because it'd be either totally overexposed or underexposed, because you didn't have any idea of what you were actually filming, because you couldn't actually see the real image. And, we used that to make films. We got it on Christmas Day, and I think our first movie was Christmas Day, which was Laser Tag the movie. And I remember, he wanted to film, so I wound up acting a lot in the films, and I wound up being the one to always be performing. And I would write my own dialogue, and he would get mad at me because he's like, I didn't tell you to say that. And I'd be like, yeah, but it felt like the story needed more. And, but, it came very natural to him to tell his little brother what to do. But, so I always wound up doing that. At first, I wanted to be a makeup artist, actually. That was the first thing that I was really interested in, because I read Fangoria magazine very religiously, and, I was really interested in special effects makeup, and, my heroes were Tom Savini and Rob Bottin, and, all these, great, artists who were doing just incredible makeup effects in the 1980s. When I was growing up, and they were kind of my heroes. Kevin Yager, who did the Nightmare on Elm Street films and a lot of other stuff like The Hidden and stuff. So I was really big fans of all theirs. Rick Baker, and so even special effects, doing miniatures and things like that. Like, all those things really fascinated me. But it was, eventually I learned very quickly two things. One, I have no skills in fine arts. I can't draw. I can't paint. And I have no patience to sculpt. So unfortunately, doing that kind of work was really outside of my skill set. But what I did have was um, a desire to tell stories in general, and that's what I started to investigate: plays, and then in high school, acting and theater, and then directing my own plays. And I wasn't Max Fisher, running around making Serpico or anything like that. But I would do, I was 16 years old trying to direct David Mamet. So thinking I was real arty, and so it was a lot of fun to kind of discover what storytelling was, and then how to work with actors and staging scenes. And that's when I fell in love with the process. Like, and I think that that's really important when you're going to be a filmmaker, is if you fall in love with the process of making movies, as opposed to just the end result. Like, so many people, I think, so many filmmakers, I think, fall in love with the end result, and then they're always just frustrated and unhappy at the difficulties in the process. But I love the process of it. And a lot of the study that I've done has been to really understand and streamline the process so that it can be as quick but also as enjoyable an experience for everybody as possible, because we're all there playing make-believe. Like, that's something I really try to hammer home before I do any production now, is I really try to remind the crew and the cast. It's like, hey, just so you know, all we're doing is playing make-believe. So safety first. We're just, the stakes only seem high, but we are really just playing make-believe and turning a camera on. And that's the vibe I try to set for whenever I'm about to shoot something, so that the cast and the crew can really enjoy themselves, and we can really feel like we're just creating something we're playing. That's where you find the most, I think, the most creative contributions from cast in particular, is when they have that feeling that they're just playing. Some people who come in who are really, really serious, and they've got all these career ideas going through their heads. That's harder for me to work with. When someone comes in and they're just like, well, I don't want to look stupid, I don't want to do that. I'm just like, hey man, we're all here just having fun. If you got all these other concerns on your mind, then maybe this isn't the set for you. You know what I mean? Like, that's the way I look at it. But that said, but like, once I did my high school time and I started making films, I did like an adaptation of Telltale Heart. I started doing some what's it called? Some other sort of original shorts that were based on plays that my friends were writing, and things like that. So I was doing a lot of different work like that, and then I decided I was going to go to Columbia College in Chicago, and that's where I did my undergrad, and that's when I really started to learn from the professionals there and the professors, like people like Ron Pitts, who was my first film teacher there when I was doing their Columbia College High School Institute the summer before I graduated. And, I got a little quick, jump on making movies that way. And Ron Pitts was a documentarian. He had shot a lot of the footage that was in When We Were Kings, the documentary about Muhammad Ali. And he had been, made all kinds of amazing socially conscious docs in Chicago and done commercials and things like that. And he was my first teacher, and he had a real big impact on me. I mean, I remember seeking him out for years afterwards and continuing to show him my work. And he kept trying to be like, hey, man, you need to meet up with this person. You meet up with that person, And, he was just a really great soul, and I learned a lot from him. So, and then there were other teachers, of course, Peter Hawley and, Tom Federico and others, Chris Swider, that I had that were all really good teachers at the school. And then, once I graduated, I went right to work. I just said, look, I'm not going to waste any time. I graduated in '02, and I immediately out of the gate wound up getting lucky, and I booked a TV pilot. It was a very small TV pilot for public access, but someone was willing to put up money, and I was directing. And I had to, do a show. I mean, a lot of people were impressed. I had done, my thesis film was a World War II movie. So I had staged a rather large production my last year of school for this movie called 2 Days in Limbo. That was had lots of makeup effects. It was an ambitious movie for, a 22-year-old. It turned out watchable. I'm just going to put it that way. And it had enough things going on in it that someone would watch and go and surmise that maybe I knew something. I got lucky. Came out of the gate. I did that. I did some other sort of vanity projects and things like that. And then I just been working pretty steadily ever since. Did my first 2 features in Chicago, and then I moved to Los Angeles for 13 years and became a first assistant director, started a post-production company, did lots of short films, and directed a lot of episodes of webisodes and for YouTube and things like that. I had a lot of people out there that wanted me to direct their shows. And then finally, I guess you'd say the bigger break started coming when I did Razor, which was a TV show, and not necessarily anything unlike what I'd been doing in terms of a web series, but this had an actual budget. It had stars in it, and I was one of the 2 writers on the show, and I directed one of the episodes. I co-produced it, and I was there for the whole production, doing second unit as well, and I got to work with people like Mina Suvari and Danny Trejo, and that was, a really cool show. It was created by David Bianchi, and he and I had been working together for a lot of years. The show was a sci-fi, cyberpunk, show. So it was stuff that was right up my alley. Genre stuff is where I really like working. And then recently I did my first feature in 17 years called The Withering, and that's coming out in July. And then, I've been in talks to do some other stuff with that same company because the movie came out pretty good. Like to think I know something. But we did that whole movie for under $10,000. So that was a really intense production. We had to shoot the whole film in, basically in 14 days. And it was, a very, it was an aggressive schedule. Like every day was 12 pages. We had lots of location changes, and it was ambitious.
Yeah, it sounds, well, it sounds really great that you have been consistent with your work, and it's just really amazing just to hear a story of an artist, how it all started with you with a little Fisher Price camcorder to now you're doing these feature films. And yeah, it's just really amazing to hear that.
One of the other things that we do here, since I moved back to the Midwest from Los Angeles back in 2021, I've been living in Wisconsin. When I got here, I was trying to find, the film community, because like I need my nerds. Where are they? And I found that like the biggest film community and thing that sort of like the glue that binds them is the 48-hour film project here in Wisconsin. Like people treat that like a holiday, and they pretty religiously do it here. At least all the film community, and there is a good dozen or so filmmakers working here in Wisconsin that are doing consistently really good work. And I've seen the films from a lot of other cities for the 48s, and sometimes I'm just going like, wow, I'm amazed how many good people are working here right now. So it's just one of those weird times where there's just a lot of really good people in a state that's not known for filmmaking. So there's some really good people here working. So that's been really exciting to get to know that community. We did the 48 now for, I think about 5 years now we've been doing it. And we won in 2023. And we went to Filmapalooza, which is like their convention with all the films, the winning films from the year. go, and we gathered in Portugal, went to Lisbon, and then we won there. So we went to the Cannes Film Festival. So we got to show our film in 2024 at Cannes, and that was an amazing experience. I got to go and see my film at the Palais, and I got to be there for the full week of, because I got a pass. I got to go into Cannes and go see films, but more importantly, I was there at the market. And that was just an amazing experience, just to be there, have a film playing, have a TV show also airing at the same time. Those are good days. It was expensive. I'm still paying it off though. So,
But yeah, no, that sounds really awesome. Yeah, like I was gonna mention, yeah, your experience over at the Cannes Film Festival, but it just seems like it was a really, really great experience. I haven't had a chance to go there, but I hear it's just amazing, and yeah.
if you want to go to a place and feel like what you do is important as a filmmaker, go to a place like Cannes. I would imagine that maybe Toronto is the same way, or Venice, like the European festivals, and maybe like a place like Toronto, which is, just a huge one, or Sundance. I can imagine it's some of the biggest. This is my first time being to a big festival. I'd done Palm Springs and things like that. I had a film play at Tokyo Short Shorts, but I didn't get to go. But going to a big festival like that, where like they treated the filmmakers like royalty. I mean, it was amazing to just be in a place again. Like, people are worried right now, like, is cinema relevant anymore? Well, if you go to a place like that, it certainly feels like it. And it was really amazing to be around that again, and just feel like maybe what I'm doing isn't, like, a waste of my life. When you struggle and you have to ask yourself those questions and say, like, am I beating my head against the wall, and hoping for a miracle, or do, moments like this exist where you're like, wow, I'm like, cinema has an important role to play in our lives. Art has an important role to play in our lives, and I'm one of the people that creates that. Even though it's an art form, not like painting, where you're a single person doing it. More like a silversmith. I think, it's like a craft. You're working with, like there's, if you're creating jewelry, there's someone making the silver pieces, and someone's got to make the chain, and there's somebody cutting the jewels, and, you're working with all these different people and all these different crafts, to combine it to make one piece. And that's kind of filmmaking, to me.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. That all sounds really, really awesome.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, just like as a director, what is like your sort of mindset or your style when going into a project? Like, what's like some of the qualities that you have going into a project as a director?
I mean, the story comes first. I think that's the most important thing. Is I always look at the story. I'm big on, script first. You got to make sure your script is tight, because that's the one thing that doesn't cost you anything usually, is to sit down and make sure your script is working. Um, I like to think that, aside from being a judge of material, at least I like to think I have taste, which I think is the most important thing as a producer. Is to figure out if something is good or not, or if maybe I think other people might think it's good, or it will be impactful. But I think the first thing I do is I really look at the script, and then I start to figure out, once I start breaking that down as a director, I start asking myself, okay, well, what can I do as a storyteller visually to tell the story better? Like, what can I add to it? Like, if I'm just approaching it like, say, a theater director, okay, I can't change the text. I just have to interpret the text. Now, okay, how do I interpret this text to tell the story better? Kind of like, it's sort of like the De Palma approach. I don't know if you're familiar with Brian De Palma's work, but like he kind of approaches it the same way. And I've heard him talk about it, where he just tries to make the material work as a director first. And so you just start thinking visually, how can I tell this story in a way that makes it more impactful? And then, I start to think about, once I start figuring out visually what I would like it to be, and I start working with the various departments, to figure out exactly all the details of the world that we're creating, because we are, every time, even if it's a world that we're familiar with and it's kitchen sink realism and it's all that, it's still a world we have to create and establish. If it's not on the page, it ain't on the stage, but if it's not on the screen, ain't nobody knows it exists. So it's got to be there. So if, you're making Rosemary's Baby and you want Rosemary's Baby to feel like it's in the real world, not in a fantasy world, you got to have code B. You have to decide on that style wise, but that's also process. That's the process of making a movie. And you have to decide what that process is going to be. Like I've worked with those people when I was an assistant director. I worked with Larry Clark. I did Marfa Girl as his first assistant director. So I was right next to him while he was making that movie. And if people are familiar with Larry Clark, he made movies like Kids and, Bully and, some really cool stuff, in the 90s and early 2000s. And I got to work with him on one of his later movies. And he doesn't even have a script, really. I mean, he had basically a slug line, be like interior, sometimes it had a location, sometimes it had a time of day, sometimes it didn't, we didn't know. And then it'd have like one sentence or two sentences about what was going to happen in the scene. And that's all we had to go with, because it was Larry Clark, it was, challenging material. There was, stretching, the bounds of like, what could be done. Also budget wise, it was a very low budget movie, but he was working with actors without script and being like, okay, now just tell your story. We turn on two cameras and then everybody, go have a smoke. Sometimes that's what happened. The Grip Electric team would go outside and hang out while, we'd be filming a scene inside for 2 hours and they wouldn't move a light. It'd be amazing sometimes how they would, how we would do it. So it was a great learning experience about a completely different process that I had no understanding of and would never conceive of doing it myself, but I got intrigued. I said, maybe I should try this at some point, which I haven't yet, but I came up with a concept for a movie wants to try it, because I am a little more controlling. I like to, control the world that I'm making a little bit more. I'm probably off topic for you here, but then, my own personal taste in terms of like how I like to tell a story. I'm also an editor. So I'm thinking about my edit and how that's going to play out while I'm shooting, so I shoot for the edit a lot of times. I'm not in the world of everybody wanting to do oneers. That's not me. I don't like that. I like to be able to edit and control the pace of the movie in the editing room. So I don't really like shooting oneers. I mean, for me, it's like, unless you're doing something truly elaborate and you really show something that needs to be told as a oneer. Otherwise, tell your story, block it, stage it, cover it. I'm definitely more Arthur Penn and less trying to think of a director that does lots of oneers. Paul Thomas Anderson was known for a long time, and and Martin Scorsese and people like that. Like I'm just not a oneer guy. But like I just rewatched Bonnie and Clyde, and I watched that movie and I go, man, that movie's got energy. Like that's what I really like to try and make my films feel like, is that they have real energy in the staging and the action of it, and then in the editorial as well, to really move as a piece. So that's a big motivation for me.
Yeah, no, that's really great to hear. Just like a sort of like a director and like an editor's mindset, just like being a filmmaker in general, wanting to try to edit as you're like making the film, I mean, everybody has like their own method of doing it.
I'll never forget, like at the end of Hearts of Darkness, the documentary about the making of Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola started waxing about how we need to dispel the idea of cinema as just a professional entity. Like this idea of professionalism in cinema. And, he's like, with these new little digital cameras, and this was him talking in the early 90s. He's like, with these new digital cameras, these video cameras, some little girl in the backyard of her parents' house in Cleveland is going to make a movie that's really beautiful, and we can start calling it an art form, and, and let it become finally what it is, which is an art form. That moment is here. We have quality cameras in our pockets almost 24 hours a day. We can film anything anywhere. We decide we're with our friends at a bar, we can start making a movie right there and be like, you know what, let me film this, and you say this, and next thing you know, you're in a bar making a movie. You can do those things now. So anybody can do it. Anyone can make a movie. So now that we have access to the tools, we don't have that gatekeeper there anymore, where you got to go get film and get it processed. My thesis film in college was 16 millimeter, and to shoot the movie, cost a lot of money. It was a couple $1,000s just for the film, and then, to have it processed, and then, later on, get it transferred and be able to edit it. And then when we went back to go do pickup shots, it was a big deal to like have to then go and get film and like figure out where we're going to do it and get the camera. And it's like, nowadays, like we were, doing a web series, and we wanted to do pickup shots. I got a digital camera and just started to go filming. We said, let's go out to the park, we'll go grab our stuff real quick. Even on my feature just now, like I borrowed I had a friend who had the same camera that we used to shoot the movie. I said, hey, can I borrow it for a day? And he goes, so I took it out and shot a bunch of pickup shots, and now they're in the film just by me. And I was like, there you go. That's democratization. We could all do it. At this point now, though, it's about, what do you do with those tools? Now we have to start focusing on technique, understanding the art form and its language. I think that's a very important part. And those of us that have been doing it, I think it's important for us to now pass what we know about the language of cinema on to the next generation. If they'll listen. I mean, they've all got YouTube and they can do whatever they want. But but I think it's really important for us to then mentor the next generation coming up, because if not, then we might wind up with just content. We have to teach it as an art form. We have to try and pass along that tradition of storytelling and what we have learned in the process of making all of our films. I've been doing it for 24 years. So I think I've learned a thing or two about telling a story in that time. Right or wrong, I've learned a thing or two. And I do teach workshops. I try and pass along, and mentor younger filmmakers wherever I can. Just because, if we don't pass this, this gift off to the next generation, teach it about its importance and why it's relevant and why we need story, then maybe we should be replaced by AI. And that's something that I'm firmly against, is the artificial intelligence taking over what we call the humanities for a reason.
Yeah, like the fear of artificial intelligence. And yeah, that's something I've discussed on this show before. People are here for it, some people are against it, some people are kind of in the middle.
I'm of two minds. I get it that, when I'm trying to write copy for a press release, there's probably better things I could be doing with my time than spending an entire afternoon laboring over that. Like, I get it. Like, go on ChatGPT, say, I need a press release for this. And I put in my stuff, and I get a press release back. Like I said, I could be doing better things with my afternoon than that, than spending my whole afternoon, because I'm a slow writer because I have ADD real bad. So it's really hard for me to sit and write, especially, administrative things. So like for things like that, I get it. Like I could be doing better things with my time. But when it comes to the actual generation of the work, I really do like to make sure that that's coming from my experience and my because that's the fun part. Like generating the work is the really fun part. I'm not looking to save time on that. I've asked ChatGPT, things like, give me a list of all the giallo movies that, exist. And I'll get my list, and then, I'll take that and, do some research. It's no different than doing research on the internet, and you asking Google for something. You're getting virtually the same thing. So like for research and things like that, but you also don't know what you're getting is accurate. You still got to check everything. But those are the kinds of things, like I said, it can be a tool that can be used to enhance your experience creating, or it can be a crutch that people use in order to fill in where they have deficiencies. It's going to be interesting to see how it continues to develop. What I get concerned about is here's the thing. None of us asked for artificial intelligence to be created in the first place. In fact, we've been warned for decades that this was going to be a problem. And lo and behold, it's here and it's a problem. So, I know that it's not other filmmakers going, man, I'm so glad we finally have artificial intelligence to be able to help us make our films better and to do this, that, and the third. No, it's rich people saying, I don't want to have to pay poorer people to do things so that I can continue to make more money and pay less in order to be able to make that. And that's where I get a problem with it, because I know it's not for my benefit. I know it's for some richer person to be able to benefit so they can cut me out and not pay me for my time. So that's why I have my antipathy, I think, toward the motivations to use it. Because I have, on my feature, there was a big divide between some of the crew members, let's just put some of the creatives that were involved in that movie. Some of them were like, hey, you missed this shot on set. Here's what artificial intelligence can do. And they did it. And I said, well, that looks great and everything, but I don't want to use it. It wasn't enough resolution because we shot the film in 8K, that it was the 1080 is the most that you can really get, commercially from artificial intelligence generated videos. Unless you're going to pay a lot more, I think, and then, then it becomes a bigger lift. And B, I had people on my team that were just like, absolutely not. I refuse to work on this movie if you guys are going to go down this road. And I said, well, I would love to have a shot that I missed, but I want to have a staff. And I can say no to doing this and have a whole staff, or I can say yes and have half a staff. So I said no. And I'm glad I made that choice, because we made the film without any artificial intelligence generated video. So I was really glad that we were able to do that. Like, everything you see on screen are things that we made by hand, So it's and it was tougher. There were times when like I said, there were scenes that were going to be tough to film, but we found a way. And we found creative ways out of it, and we wound up doing some really inventive things. And that's the fun, is creating the illusion. That's we're doing magic tricks here. That's the whole point of it, is to do the magic trick for the audience and really blow their minds. Like I was thinking about this today, and because I went to the dentist, and this is what I was thinking of when I was at the dentist. It was like, the film brats, Scorsese, Spielberg, Lucas, De Palma, Schrader, that whole group, Coppola, when they all came out, yes, some of them had special effects that were bigger and more exciting than anybody had ever seen. Things like, Star Wars and Close Encounters, and they were some of it was special effects that they were doing. They were creating spectacles that we hadn't seen. But a lot of what they do was just storytelling. And the way they told a story was unlike how anybody else was telling a story before them, because they had studied film so intently. They knew movies, they knew storytelling, they knew emotion, they knew the tools and the language of cinema better than any generation that had ever come before them. And that allowed them to innovate, because once you know it, you can forget it. But also it allowed them to do things that we had never seen, just tell stories in such a concise way, in such an emotional way that, nobody had ever seen that before. And that's what made their movies so popular and so riveting. Because I was like, well, movies like, Raging Bull. I mean, people had seen boxing films before, but nobody had seen a boxing movie like Raging Bull. I don't know what its box office was, but I can imagine it was a movie that had a huge impact on the people that did see it. So how could you ever look at another boxing film after that and say, I'm going to judge it by Raging Bull, because that's the gold standard. And that's what that generation was able to do. So I think that that's something, now that we have so much information, so much access to the language of cinema, because of what, and that generation, they didn't have home video. If you missed it when it was in theater, you missed it. Maybe it came out on TV, or it went to, a revival theater eventually, and maybe you caught it on a double bill. But when, Schrader and, De Palma decided they were going to go see Vertigo one night in the 1970s, they had to wait for it to play it at a museum. So they went to go see it, and then they were like, hey, we should just rip this off. and they made Obsession as a result. Which, if you haven't seen, is a really interesting play on basically Vertigo. But they had to wait till it went to a theater. So they once you saw it, they couldn't then take that film and study it afterwards, and go home and rewatch scenes and be like, oh, you didn't have that. It wasn't something that was in the cards. You had to actively seek it. John Milius, when they went and rented a copy of there was the Howard Hughes movie about the airplanes. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but you know the film I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They show him making it in Hell's Angels, I think is what it is, right? I think is it Hell's Angels?
I think so, yeah.
It's the World War I airplane movie that he made in The Aviator.
Okay.
They showed him making it. But if you go and watch that movie, like, they rented there was like a 16 millimeter print of that movie and got together and watched it. And, after it was over, John Milius stood up and gave a big speech about, we need to make movies like this, and, they were obsessed with making films and the process and learning it. And that never stopped. And that if we're going to do that as a next generation of filmmakers, especially indie filmmakers, because that's all we have. We don't have the ability for spectacle. We don't have the money for it. So the only thing we have is story and how we tell a story, where we put a camera, when we do a close-up, how we do a one-er if we're going to do it. Those things, that's our judgment, our style, our way we tell a story. That's the only thing that we have to sell. And we can do it and do it better if we know the language of the art form that we're showing and we're using.
Yeah, definitely. Those are all very valid points, I want to go back and I want to talk about, because you mentioned the 48-hour film projects that you did in Wisconsin. And, I've seen like a good majority of them, and they're all very, very great. I talked with, one of your co-stars on the show, Amelia Marie, and she's incredible. And she talked about how great of an experience it was doing all these films, like Silent Sonata, The Tie That Binds, The Song of Lake, all these very great films. I was just curious, just like what your experience like it was making like those films and working with those amazing actors. Just like, could you tell like kind of what your experience was overall, just like making those variety of short films?
Well, this goes back to something I was going to bring up earlier, and I'm glad you brought it back up. Like the film that we made that Amelia was part of, also that we did that went to Cannes,
right?
Was Reasonable Doubt, which was the legal drama. But with the 48s, because you're telling a story in under 7 minutes, so you don't have a lot of time to do anything really elaborate. At that point, you're really just it's pure storytelling. Can you put together a story in that brief period of time that really is moving and emotional and does, tell something and then stands out? Reasonable Doubt was, basically, so really all I was going to say is all you get is to make a hook, like basically in so many words. Like you create a hook for your film and then you kind of just play that out. So like example being like Reasonable Doubt was, okay, we got drama was our genre. And I said, look, I have always wanted to do a legal drama. I love things like The Firm and The Pelican Brief and, Time to Kill, like John Grisham stories, but I also love, things like The Verdict. Like The Verdict is one of my favorite movies with Paul Newman and James Mason and Robert Prosky and Lindsay Krause it's just Sidney Lumet directed it. He did so many of those wonderful films, and David Mamet's screenplay. Just every part of it is just it's about as good as you can make one of the films in that genre. And I said, well, let's do it. But I also figured, okay, well, if we're going to do a legal drama, I don't got a courtroom, so how are we going to do this? But I did have experiences in the legal field. I had been a legal videographer, so I would film depositions as a day job. So I knew the deposition process really well. So I said, well, I can stage a deposition anywhere, because that's what we did. You found any office. So we were working out of a office building where I had my film office, and they were closing the building down. So there were all these empty offices on my floor. So I just asked the owner, I said, hey, can I use all the leftover furniture that's kind of hanging around? And so I got all this office furniture. So I said, oh, great. I can stage depositions and that'll be part of the story. So, I've got all these young actors. We put it together, and then Matt Jones and I wrote the script. We sent it out that night, and, Amelia showed up the next morning with her script. She's like, I love my character. She's like, I get to be the bad guy this time. And I said, yeah, so you get to have a lot of fun. And Sidney Costinger was great in it. And we had Frankie Bright and, Mick Malt, and just a lot of really good, talented young people. And then some veterans, like Maureen Jansen. Was wonderful in the film as the district attorney, and we had a good time, and we got to put together, I thought, a really cool, really neat little movie that just told a really strong story. And the fact that it got so much response, such a great response in the 48 community, and that led us to go screen it at Cannes. But like when you start looking at some of the other films, again, it's just a hook. For the Song of Laki, which is I think one of my favorites that we did, which is a horror musical. That was the genre we got. We got horror musical. I looked at it, and that was our dreaded, genre. I said, because I don't direct musicals. I don't know how to direct dance. I don't know how to tell people how to sing. I wouldn't know if they were out of key. I wouldn't know how to tell them what key to sing in. So we had to figure out a way to creatively tell a story that was a musical and a horror film. And I said, I wanted to do something scary. I said, I don't want to do, something campy. I didn't want to do, we've seen Rocky Horror, I can't recreate that, so we don't have the production value for that. But I had a house and I had some actors. I said, well, what if people are singing a cappella? I said, what if the singing is the horror? And then we said, well, what about a curse that forces you to sing nonstop? Well, that sounds horrifying, where you've lost control of your body to the point where you can't stop singing, and then it's like a curse. And that's what happens to Amelia's character in the film. She can't stop singing. And I was like, and you see how quickly it turns into horror. She can't stop. She's cutting herself. She's trying to, she winds up knocking herself out in order to just stop. And it becomes, and so that it just started with something as simple as that, like someone cursed. And then, the fears of, inviting a foreigner into your home, in that case, a foster child, and then not knowing whether you can trust this foreign person in your home that you don't know anything about, and you're gonna take them in. And some people just can look at that, look at a kid and just be like, well, what harm could they be? They're just a child, they're innocent, and some other one looks at them with a lot of suspicion. And that's the dynamic between the husband and wife. She looks at this child with all this suspicion and fear because she's not ready herself to be a mother. And the husband because they're a young couple, he's just like, I'm ready, let's do this. He can't wait to be a dad. And he sings to her, fulfilling the musical the portions of the story, but then it becomes a song. If you listen to the lyrics of the song she's singing, it's about dropping a child off a bell tower. It sounds like a really kind of like nursery rhyme, but which was the intention. But if you actually listen to the lyrics, it's about somebody with a burden in their hand, walking up, hence a child they don't want, walking up to a bell tower and dropping it off. So it's a direct reflection of her own insecurities and fears of motherhood, and then she's cursed to sing it over and over again. So that was and once you start making all those connections and you're in the writing process, and Amelia and I wrote that together, so there's a lot of both of us in there, because I'm a lot older than her. She's she's young, she's in her 20s, I'm 45. So we had both of our perspectives in that story. She's like, I'm a young person, I'm not ready to have kids. I'm like, well, I'm 45, I'm a stepfather, I'm all about it. We both of our perspectives wound up being in there, and it wound up creating a really interesting dynamic to create those two characters, and then to create something that was truly horrific. Then of course Amelia brings what she does to a story, to a film, and she's a brilliant talent. So that's and that's how we made something like, the Song of the Key. And then, if you do, you know, you look at some of the other things that we've done, like Together, which was, a science fiction story about alternative universes. Well, I said, when we were, we got the idea of, multiverse, where I said, how would we do that nobody else has done? Someone on our team just goes, what about organ theft? And I said, that sounds amazing. I said, how do you do that? And I said, oh, it's like fishing. They send you out to another multiverse. You convince somebody to sign something, in this case, without looking at the fine print, like an Apple, terms and conditions that nobody reads, and, once they've agreed to it, too late. They have no idea what they're agreeing to. So, it's like fishing. They fish them, they pull them back to their universe where it's totally legal to farm people's organs for, people who are dying in that multiverse. And that's what happens to the fate of the young lady in that movie. Her dead lover shows up and says, come back with me to my multiverse because you died in my universe, which is true, but she was only in the hospital. And she sneaks her back, and they tie her up like the end of Seconds. That was the idea too. I'm a big John Frankenheimer fan, and so at the end of Seconds, they throw her into a wheelchair, tie her down, gag her, and she's screaming for help while the other person looks on, because now she's just a thing. She's not a person. So you're seeing the person who was her lover just looking at her with just total no emotion. She's a product now. So it was a lot of fun, and and it's really dark and sinister because that's what we do. I don't do comedies, at least not anymore. And so it's just a really basic concept, of someone just saying organ theft or organ harvesting, and I was like, that's our movie. We'll figure out how to do it, and then figuring out a context to put that in, because that's just all you get. All it is really a hook, and then you explore it the best you can within 7 minutes. At least that's the way I approach, doing a short film, in that context. But feature films aren't much different. I mean, you get a hook for something, and then you say, now let's explore it. For The Withering, which is the feature that we have coming out in July, I mean, it was really just the concept of being afraid of getting older, which is, I think all of us, eventually start to ask, ourselves those questions about how do I feel about my life? How do I think feel about where it's gone, the choices I've made? And then sometimes you get a little regretful. Sometimes, maybe you're full of regret. Maybe you're really angry as you're coming toward the end about the choices you made. Did you live your life to the fullest? And well, what if you're given a second chance and you get to do it again? But in order to do it again, it costs everybody else their lives. And that's what, the question that's asked of one of our characters in that film is, she gets a second chance, but she's like an energy vampire now. She's draining everybody else. So she's stealing the life force from everyone else so that she can be young and go out and, what is she going to do with that time? She's going to go out and be selfish. And, and that's what causes all the drama in the story. So it's more of our intention was to do a Stephen King style, sort of it feels like it's adapted from a novel that you never read style, of lots of multi-characters, sometimes side stories and side characters that don't necessarily feel like they're always part of the main story, but they provide the texture, kind of like Salem's Lot. That was the idea of the film, is to just have this hook, but then populate the town, because once the town starts being drained, the more texture you have in that town, the more it feels like you are part of that community. Who's having an affair with who's just started their job, who doesn't have health insurance yet. This guy's still living with his mom. Then we got to explore all kinds of ideas as a result. And it's all based on just, again, one hook, but then now that you have 2 hours to explore it. And that's the difference between, a short film and, doing something for the 48 in under 7 minutes, and something that you have a bigger canvas to paint a more detailed picture. It's was an impressionist, sort of like pointillism, I think. Is that a thing? Again, not a fine artist. So if I'm misquoting this, or misidentifying this, my apologies. But it's with the Chicago art museum, you get the little pointillist, and you got the big giant picture, and you stand back from it, you can see the faces of the people having the picnic on the lake, but the closer you get, it's just little dots, as you get closer, and that's making a feature film. It's you start with the little dots, and then you just keep moving back further and further, and then suddenly you got a giant canvas that you're telling a story on. Really take your time, make a movie with one person, then make a movie with two people or three people. Learn how to direct three people in a room and make that interesting. Those are, really understand the dynamics of blocking, understand how to work with actors. So many young filmmakers, I'm going to put this, are obsessed with cinematography and forget that they're directing. And I think that there's, I've worked with directors that were, when I was as a producer, and sometimes as a writer, where they're like, well, I don't know what I'm looking at till I see it through the lens. And I go, dude, you got a lot to learn, pal, because there's so much more to telling a story than just what the shots are. You got to get out there, you got to block it with the actors. And then the blocking often dictates the shots that you're going to get, because, and then you kind of work within that. And, or if you're staging things to fit a shot, probably more than likely you didn't work through it with the actors first, and you don't know what they're going to do. And then the next thing that's going to happen is you're going to have Warren Beatty on your set going, well, why are we doing it this way? And then the shot that you just spent all this time designing and figuring out and going, oh, it's going to be this most beautiful, epic scene, and they're just like, yeah, but my character wouldn't do that. Like, I love Tom, the director of Les Mis and The King's Speech, told a great story about working with Helen Mirren on Prime Suspect in England for the BBC. And he said that he had designed this shot where, she was going to come out of this building after coming and seeing a dead body, and there's all these, textures in the building and the wall and broken windows and all this stuff. And I'm going to have her this big dolly shot. And, Helen Mirren shows up on set and she goes, well, I don't think I'd do that. I think I'd just be over the wall over there smoking a cigarette. And he was like, oh, okay. Well, I guess all this dolly track I just laid and all this time I spent designing this shot, and the actor had a better idea. So maybe just start working with the actor. And then you can, figure it out from there. But I think that's a great lesson, is that, that's part of the collaboration that you're doing with, all the other creatives on set, So that's why, you block, light, shoot. You block the scene first, then you light it, and then you shoot it, and everybody tries to do it backwards. They try to set up a camera and block a scene with like stand-ins, and just be like, well, this is the shot that I'm getting, because this is the shot I want. And, I'll try and, move all the other chess pieces around just to fit that. And like I said, inevitably, you're going to wind up with maybe a cool shot, but it has no emotion. I don't know. That's just me. I think that's a lesson to take, to really make sure that you're always thinking about, working with your cast and making sure that, what you're doing is telling the story. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, if you have, there's certain sets that are designed to be shot a certain way, and then you got to kind of work, with that. And those are things that you have to, the challenges that you have to face, when you're trying to do something that's very intricately designed. You're designing something to function only one way, and then you kind of got to work with cast that kind of like are willing to play the game with you and go, okay, well, let me see if I can work within the confines of the box with you. And you got to make sure you have those people, who see the box and they go, I love the way the box is designed. Let me work within it. But that's hard. That's not every time. So that's about choosing your cast and your collaborators as carefully as you can, to make sure you have the right people to do something like that. There are people that are, like I said, and sometimes they're not wrong. They're just trying to do their job the best way that they know how to. Like they want to be able to tell a good story as well. The best actors think like directors. They're thinking about the whole thing. They're not just thinking about, they're thinking, okay, this shot's from over here. Okay, all right, well, if I do this, that tells this story. If I do this, that tells a different story. They're thinking about the story and the through line of their character at every place. one of the things I love about Amelia is she always thinks that way, and that's one of the reasons I love working with her, is because I have to. I mean, other than telling her where I'd like to stand, I don't really tell her. I don't have to really direct her that much unless there's something we fundamentally disagree about. And that happens occasionally, with talented people. Sometimes you have two different ideas about a scene, and you work with them to find the best way to tell the story. But it's better to have people with ideas than to have people who are just like, sure. That doesn't help you. So those are, but it's a stepping stone. Like, learn a little bit at a time. If you decide you're going to jump right into a feature and you never made a movie before, inevitably there are things about the process that will be new to you, and it can impact the film if you don't know the process of making a movie. I heard a great story about Marshall Hershkowitz, who works with Edward Zwick all the time. Edward Zwick directed Glory and The Last Samurai and a lot of other, films that are, classics, or very successful, one or the other. I do have issues with Last Samurai, but that's just me. But I love Glory. Glory's a great film. But he, Marshall Hershkowitz, who's his writing partner for many years and producer that he works with, his first time directing a movie, he thought you had to film each line individually. So he just, as he was filming, he goes, okay, now say this line. And then they cut. Okay, now roll again. Okay, and now say this line. All in the same shot. And he thought that was how you filmed a movie the first time out, because he didn't understand the process. And of course, within a day or so, somebody told him, like, you can just have them say all their lines in that shot, and then you just cut it together later. And he goes, oh, okay. I didn't know that the first time that I started shooting a movie. Like, I wasn't aware that that's how you filmed a film. Like, I started filming one line at a time. I was doing, and then, after a while I said, geez, this is taking forever. Like, there's got to be an easier way to do this. And then somebody was like, well, you could just have us say it all at once and then cut it together. And I was like, because you just don't know unless and that's the thing. You have to learn by either doing or working with people that know better and have more experience. That's why a lot of first time filmmakers have really experienced camera people and really experienced assistant directors, because those are the people that really save your ass. When it comes down to it, you have to have people around you that will support you and be like, okay, this is how you do it, or this is not how you do it. And having those folks around really helps, guide a novice filmmaker through their first experience. Sometimes, that can be a painful experience, because there's a lot of hard truths that, someone who has grand ideas has to face, and, compromise can be almost seemingly like an impossible ask for somebody. But that's you have to go and learn, and that's just part of the experience is learning, when and how to compromise. And then inevitably you never remember what your intentions were in the first place. You just got what you have. We just remember the circumstances under which we filmed something. I'll never forget, the circumstances under the feature we just shot. I was sick for, the whole last week of the production. And I got really sick during while we were filming the climax of the movie. And I was just coughing my guts out. And, I was sick for 2 or 3 weeks after the production because my body had just collapsed. But, I'll never forget, as I watched the movie now, that's all I remember. I don't remember the individual moments and creative decisions that brought us to whatever great moment was in the movie. I just remember, man, I was really sick that night. Oh, I wish I hadn't eaten Burger King that morning. Those were the things that we remember. Ed Zwick talks about that when they were making Glory. He said all we really remember was the fact that we were all getting chiggers and ticks on us and shooting in these forests and in North Carolina and South Carolina where they were filming. So he's like, we're covered head to toe in Evian Skin So Soft, and we just all smelled like that for an entire company covered head to toe in Evian Skin So Soft to fight off chiggers. He's like, that's all I remember. Those are the things that, just come with experience, but those are the great things too. Those are the things that we share now. And, I was just having a conversation with the co-writer on the film we just did, The Withering, and he said, "Oh, I'd love to hear it," because he wasn't there every day. He was only there for one day of the shoot just to see how it was going. And he said, "I'd love to hear more stories." I say, "Well, they're funny now, but weren't funny at the time." There's a lot of things that occurred on that shoot that are funny now. Like the church scene that we shot, we didn't know, but the location had scheduled an actual church session, like a church, an actual church had their services that day. So in the middle of the day, we had to shut down, go outside and shoot something else while we finished, this Baptist church, was going on inside the church. And then they came out and they were like, "Well, what are you doing? Is there witchcraft in this movie?" And they were very concerned about that. And I said, "No, there's no witchcraft in it." And then they gave us a blessing. Well, 2 days later, we were, struggling to stay on schedule. And in that same building, a Satanist priest had his own, I guess you would call it shop, where he was doing blessings, and he came by our set, and the man scared the shit out of me. Very nice, but he had his, eyes tattooed black, and he was an intense dude. And I was like, "Can I help you?" Because no one else was on set before. I was like, "Dude, is this like the angel of death? Like, did I pass? Am we cursed? Because we were feeling very cursed as a production." And he's like, "No, I see what you guys are doing." He's like, "Would you like a blessing?" I said, "Why not? I could use all the help that I can get." So he saged our set, and people came in and like, "What's that smell?" And then they see this guy walking around with like a sage thing walking through the set. And people are like, "What the hell is going on here?" I said, "Don't worry." I told him it was okay. I'm like, we've covered all of our bases now.
Yeah, I think it's really fun. Just like also just like those on-set experiences or like those stories. It's you mentioned that like usually that's kind of the thing you remember. What you're seeing on the film, but then you just think of behind the scenes, like how you said, like you saying like, "Oh, I remember I was so sick that day," or "I remember when this happened or when that happened." So it's really funny to look back on that, and like you said, like the day of, maybe it was like a kind of a serious problem that you had to fix, but then like after it's all done and the film's done and everything, you kind of look back and you laugh at it, and so it's like, "Oh, that was so crazy. What were we thinking?" That sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's really fun to have like those moments like that, especially like as like a cast or crew, because those are the kind of moments that to bring you guys like together and wanting to work on like future projects.
I mean, it goes back to something I was talking about earlier, which is, do you love the process? Because that's the process. Those delays, headaches, those things that occur, when you're on set, that is the process. And do you love it or not? Now, the process can be frustrating. It can be daunting. It can feel almost impossible. But if you don't want to be there and you don't want to be on set, then be a critic, like that's the way I look at it. Or just work exclusively in post-production. But if you like being on set and you love those moments, like I love working with actors. I love, like, my favorite kinds of scenes are, to do, a couple of actors in a room and really have complicated blocking and figure out how to cover all that. Like, I don't know how many people in our business say that is like the thing they love doing. But for me, that's kind of the juice. I love having a couple actors in a room and then reestablishing the line as they move over here and like have something really complicated, and then to see it all play out and build as a scene in the editing room and really see it come to life. Like that's what I love doing. For other people, it's telling very small, intimate stories with a person in a bathroom doing, trying to shave or something, I mean, that's something Scorsese did, for The Big Shave. But, sometimes people are visual stylists. They're people like Guillermo del Toro, where they want to build the whole world. They want to control all the details. Sometimes for me, like I said, I like to tend to go into real locations and film things for real and use what's there and let that inform the movie, because I don't feel like, at least I'm not working at a budget level where I can control that many things. So I might as well just use it. I use that for my, use that as my, as part of my process. So
I was curious to know, just like, so I know you have like your production company, Pico Boulevard. Do you have like any like advice, or what was like the steps that you took to make this production company?
Sure. This goes to the marketing of yourself as an artist. And like, I think it's really important for all artists, like especially independent filmmakers, to really understand that that is part of our process. Like I joke, but it's half joke, which is that I spend about 10% of my time working on films. I spend 90% of it hustling because, trying to remind people that I'm alive and that I'm looking for work and staying on people's minds, because people often, when an opportunity shows up, they're going to call the first person they think of. So you need to be on people's minds all the time. So whether that's a social media presence and learning how to market yourself in a social media setting, or whether or not you are an aggressive emailer and, maybe you write personal letters and you send postcards to people, whatever it is you do that allows people to remember you when an opportunity arises. So for me, a production company, I needed to, because I wanted to operate as a producer aside from my work as a director. I felt like that was really important for me to have that, that entity, to be able to operate that way, because I wanted to be able to produce for other people. And also develop work, that, I would be part of creatively, but wouldn't necessarily always be the main person, like in television, and things like that, or documentary series and things like that. I wanted to be able to have an entity to work out of, but also from a branding standpoint too. Like, I wanted people to understand when I make a movie, to expect a certain quality and a certain type of storytelling. So, and then Pico Blvd Entertainment, my last name is Pico. Pico Boulevard is a famous street in Los Angeles. And I felt, even though no relation, but I felt like adopting that as my company's name just felt appropriate. It's my last name, and I wanted to have it as part of the production company. I've had other production companies that I've formed with other people, and I'm a part of some other folks' production companies and support roles. Because you don't know where the opportunities are going to come from. So you do what you got to do. And, we explore all opportunities whenever we can. But the most important thing, I think, is to learn how to market yourself, though, to really get down and figure out, who are you as a filmmaker, and try to project that to the world. Like, I have a friend, Mars Litica, who's a really good filmmaker. And he's really into, his father is from Denmark and his mother was African American. So he likes to talk about, the mixed future, where, lots of folks are going to be from different, backgrounds, and what's that going to do for us as storytellers. So like, that's his online persona. That's what he likes to put forward. And, that's the types of films and stories that he seeks. So that's his niche, For me, I do genre films. I've sort of sold myself as somebody who does horror and science fiction, and those are kind of my bread and butter, because those are any of the genres I really enjoy working in, because I like to tell those stories, because it gives me the most opportunities for magic tricks and to really do things that are exciting and interesting, and tell stories, because within that, you can tell really passionate, really intense stories. And you also get to use in horror and science fiction, particularly in horror, you really can use all the tools of cinema in the language of cinema to their fullest extent. And it's a really exciting way to be able to make stuff that's pure cinema. When you really think about some of the more interesting and exciting movies that have come out over the last, even 15 years or 20 years, you'd find a lot of things that were in those genres, that were really exploring how to use those tools. So it's really important to me to put that forward. But that's just because that's what I like to do. And so that's part of my online persona. I talk a lot about that. I use social media to try and, advertise the things that I'm doing. Probably could use it better, could learn how to do it better. But it's up to you to figure out who your online persona is as a filmmaker, and to try and stay in people's thoughts and on their minds, so those opportunities come up for you.
Yeah, I think that's really great, learning how to market yourself, and like you said, building that sort of social media presence. I feel like, yeah, those are very important.
Yeah, no, that's such an important part. And so many of us are not good at telling the world about what we do. Now, Granted, not everything you do should be put out into the public eye. Some things that you make should just be for you. You have to have some self-awareness as an artist about what's working and not working. And a lot of us, I think, even myself included sometimes, don't have a lot of self-awareness. See, if you made something, just because you made it doesn't mean it needs to be shared with the world. Sometimes it's just a learning experience for yourself. Share it with your friends that you did it with so that they have it. Maybe there's something in there that they like. But you got to have some self-awareness as an artist about what it is you've actually created, and especially for the marketplace. Because again, like I see reels all the time. Like I get sent reels by editors and actors and cinematographers that I just go, why did you send this to me? Like, this isn't good work. Do you think this is good work? Or is this the only work you have? And if this is the only work you have, I get it why you put it on there, because you got to show something. But it's better than to just contact me and say, I have a lot of talent, I have a lot of ability, I haven't had an opportunity yet, give me the chance. And if their knowledge of cinema is what I'm looking for, then maybe there's an opportunity there. But if you have a reel that's worth sharing, don't share the reel. So I think it's a little bit of also like a little self-censorship, a little self-awareness about what you've actually got to share with people. I get acting reels all the time that are just not good and they don't have good work on them. And I'm like, I get it. You've got tape. You've been in things, but you're not good in any of these things. Don't share them with people. Like that's something that, and that's the harder truth about what we do. I've got 85 films I've done, I don't have all of them online. I don't share all of them. A lot of them are just mine. And they never will see the light of day because I know that there is better work that I've done. So I try to put the best work forward. And I think that that's really important. And it's an unfortunate truth, I think, about us as artists that we have to kind of face sometimes. And then if you can face that and you can say, I can do better than this, then challenge yourself and do better. Make another film. Make something that's good. And then when you've got something that's working, then share that and be proud of it. But if you got something that's not good and it's not good, don't put it out there in the world just because you want to have something in the world. I think that's a harder lesson for us to learn because, all of our projects are our babies. Just sometimes they, when they come out, they don't smell right. They're a little weird and maybe the genetics behind them aren't very good. And you're just like, oh, well, I do have to lock this one up in the basement and never let it out and see the light of day. That sounds cool.
But no, I think it is like, yeah, a great thing. Like not everything you make, especially starting out, is going to be really, like pretty good, or nothing like that. So, but again, it's just a great learning experience. Like at least you did something rather than just doing nothing, like so. And again, even if it's not good, like, and you decide not to share it with the world, at least now for like your next project, like what to do or what not to do. So, and then eventually you'll get to the point where it's like, this is worth sharing, whether it just be on YouTube or if you're ambitious, like submitting it out to film festivals and stuff. And,
like you made the film, and you got the experience from it. Take that experience and then apply that, like you said, apply that to the next one. And take that and as a learning experience. Like there were a lot of movies and commercials I made that were, at the time, like I keep as an artist going back and I'm wondering what I was thinking back then. Like when I was in my 20s and I was making films. I don't know if I was operating purely on instinct or if I really knew something. And I worry because I feel like I was just operating a lot of times on instinct, and sometimes I got lucky and sometimes I didn't. Sometimes things turned out, sometimes they were really terrible. And I've buried those things appropriately. But like that's something I wonder just how much I actually knew, because I'm certain I wasn't like mature. And I know that when I was at Columbia, like my screenwriting classes, I wasn't really paying that close of attention. I felt like I knew a lot of things. And sometimes I was right, and a lot of times I was wrong too. It wasn't until I realized, I think that it was probably in my late 20s when I started to realize that, I needed to continue to learn and make educating myself a lifelong, I don't want to say adventure, but a lifelong commitment. Because, once as an example, I started teaching a screenwriting workshop. And I just said, I've got professional experience. I've sold a lot of scripts. I've had a lot of scripts of mine made into movies by other people now. And I said, I think I have something to share on the topic. But then when I actually sat down and said, okay, define 3-act structure versus 5-act structure, I had to look it up. I couldn't define it accurately in my own words. I had to go look it up and I had to like research it. And I said, wow, I was working a lot on assumptions or just things that I thought I knew versus real information for a lot of my time in the film industry. So I really re-educated myself to be able to teach that course because I said, if I'm not going to give people bad information. So I went and I said, okay, well, what are the 7 basic stories? I couldn't name them off the top of my head. I had to stop and I had to go research it. And I said, this is the kind of thing I wish I'd done 20 years ago because I would have been so much more productive as a screenwriter. I would have been so much more, I think, I would have had better first drafts. There have been a lot of opportunities that early in my career didn't come to fruition because I just didn't know as much as I thought I knew. So also being aware of your own limitations as an artist, I think is really important, and trying to make sure that you're really doing the work and studying, studying your craft all the time, making sure that you know what you're doing, so that when you get an opportunity, it's luck. There's no such thing as luck. They say it's when opportunity meets preparation. Well, I was deeply unlucky multiple times when I had opportunities that I wasn't prepared for. And I think that it's really important now to now that I'm older and I think a little more mature, I think I've come to grips with that, and I've started to try to correct that. So when opportunities do come, I really am, the one who has studied the homework and done the homework, so that I can be prepared when that opportunity comes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really great to hear, and hopefully people can hear that advice, and it can sink in with them, because we're not alone in this. Like, where people may be struggling with writing, but if they could hear like stories like that and advice, and just like the success that you had, just like with making these short films and having one of them screened at the Cannes Film Festival, I feel like that's just great motivation for someone to hear, like for them to say to themselves, if they can do it, maybe I can do it, so I feel like that's just really great to hear.
The confluence of events that have led to me kind of being where I am, I have to acknowledge it. A lot of it is luck. I happen to be that person that somebody thought of when the opportunity showed up, and I did well enough to stay in the room once I did get that phone call. So it was it really is there is no formula, I believe, to success in this industry. There are too many of us that worked too hard and had too much talent that didn't get opportunities to say that if you just do this and this, it's all going to work out. That's not necessarily the truth. We're all you know, struggling to break through, and to get bigger and better opportunities. But at the end of the day, like I said, who breaks through and who doesn't, it truly is a question of just, happenstance. There are people that I have met in this business that, couldn't direct a way out of a paper bag. And yet though they're doing, multi-million dollar movies or multi-million dollar commercials I worked on. I watched people just fumble their way through it and go like, wow, how the hell did this person never get a job? But when the opportunity came, they were the person that either spoke the loudest or were just in the right position, and someone said, I believe in you. And they wound up with what they wound up. Their career went the way it did. And there were a lot of people I met that were really talented that just never got their shot. And they either settled into, support roles in the film industry, or they just went off and did something else. And it's, it really is, there, like I said, there is no formula that will predict, what your fate will be. But, if you love it and you want to keep doing it, just keep doing it, but learn it and learn it better than everybody else in the room, so that when that opportunity shows up, you're the one that stands out.
Thank you for tuning in to the Troubled Artists podcast. Have a great day.